Welcome into a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Once again, I know we chatted on Friday, but for those of you, I'm sure many of you were off work for the last several days. I was as well. And it's good to be back. I feel like some people think that the week after Thanksgiving is one of the toughest weeks to come back from, after a long break out of the entire calendar year. I thought that might be the case, but I'm feeling pretty good here on a Monday, which is, I would say, it's a good sign for the week ahead. Hopefully. Hopefully it is for you as well. So happy Monday. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. We'll start with Indiana football, of course. What a wonderful way for them to end the regular season by absolutely demolishing Purdue 66-0. If you missed the post-game wrap-up with Alec Lasley and myself, feel free to check out all of that on YouTube for really more of a focused reaction on that game in general. Today we'll probably give more of a we'll talk with Mitchell Paige, of course, and he'll share his thoughts on the game. He was there, but I'll probably give more of an abstract take on the game and looking forward to the postseason and that type of stuff. But what a fun game just to watch and to see. Like, if you had told somebody without mentioning, the rest of the schedule, right? You tell somebody one thing back in August or July before the season started, and you find out that Indiana is going to defeat Purdue 66-0 in the finale of the regular season. What would you have predicted that meant for the season as a whole? I probably would have assumed that Indiana was still maybe 8-4, 9-3, and that Purdue was, just a really bad team, which they were. But nobody, excuse me, nobody would have guessed. And I sound like a broken record because I know that I've said this in some way, shape, or form multiple times now. There's no soul, fan, not a fan, analyst, whatever it may be, that thought Indiana would be sitting today here on December 2nd with an 11-1 record, primed to be in the 12-team college football playoff. Kurt Cignetti primed to win probably every Coach of the Year honor he could receive, whether it be Big Ten Coach of the Year or National Coach of the Year. And not only that, but Indiana's locked him up now for 8 more years, I believe, on his new deal. And so what a fun time to be alive with, enjoying this Indiana football season. And there's still more to come. Unfortunately, they will not play in the Big Ten championship game due to tiebreaker rules and Penn State having the upper hand against Indiana due to common opponent records. I believe that's the tiebreaker that they went with. And maybe that plays out in Indiana's favor, of course, because we know they're going to be in the college football playoff, or at least I hate to just assume something is fact without it happening just yet. But there's no reason to think that this Indiana football team won't be in the college football playoff. But I'm sure there would have been a large contingency had Indiana had the tiebreaker against Penn State to be in the Big Ten championship. There would have been a large group of people saying, well, if they get blown out by Oregon, they shouldn't be in the playoff. And that may be true. But we'll never know what that would have looked like because Indiana will not be playing in the Big Ten championship game. Instead, they will await their fate. Tomorrow, they will release another edition of the college football playoff rankings. I assume they will jump up maybe one spot, maybe two, just depends on how the committee views the Hoosiers, of course. I doubt they get in front of Ohio State, even though they took a loss. My guess is Indiana and Ohio State, similar to the new AP poll, will be right next to each other in the rankings. But they should definitely move up thanks to the Miami loss. And that may even knock Miami out of the playoff altogether because they didn't qualify for the ACC championship. It'll be SMU versus Clemson. So that is a bit of a shakeup that many, I don't believe, were expecting at least a few weeks ago. And then from there, they will wait and see what happens this Saturday in the conference championships. And then after that, I believe it's either Sunday or Monday. I mentioned this later on with Mitchell Paige as well. I haven't fact-checked this answer just yet. Maybe some of you could remind me in the comments if you want to. I believe it's the Sunday, the day after Championship Saturday, that we will learn the final college football playoff rankings, and along with that, Indiana's final judgment, if you will, where they will end up being and playing at for the first ever 12-team playoff. So exciting stuff, very fun stuff, and shout out to the Hoosiers. Go Hoosiers, right? On the flip side of things, talking about with Purdue, I mean, because of that 66-0 victory from Indiana, that was probably more than enough for Purdue's athletic director to pull the trigger and decide to move on, I should say, from second-year head coach Ryan Walters. And I believe they decided that they had to fork up $10 million to do so. And they'll be searching for a head coach for the second time in just a couple of years. I don't know which direction they will go. I remember seeing a Purdue friend of mine, it wasn't Dustin Schutte, post a list of his of coaches that he would want to see at Purdue to replace Ryan Walters. The one name that stood out to me, and it's the only reason it stood out, is because this particular head coach is also currently with James Madison. Of course, Curt Cignetti, formerly of James Madison. I would like to see him, Bob Chesney, I believe that's his name. I'd like to see him be at Purdue, just because why not have the old Oaken Bucket game be between two former JMU head coaches? So that'd be something interesting to keep an eye on. I'll also go through, why not do it now? I'm going to go through a list of current openings, not all of them, but some of the standout openings in college football since the season ended this past weekend. Mike New at Ball State, of course, a little local flavor right there. After, I believe it was 3 seasons with the Cardinals, he was let go after not being able to make it to the postseason, not doing super well in the MAC. I can't remember if this particular Ball State head coach ever gave Indiana any fits. I know there's been a couple of Ball State teams, eras, if you will, that have given Indiana some issues. I don't believe Mike New was one of them. But it'll be interesting to see who they go with. I don't really know. Whenever you're a G5 program looking for a head coach, do you prioritize coordinators? Do you prioritize somebody from the FCS level? It's very interesting to think of what direction they may go when it comes to them picking their new head coach. Elsewhere, Tom Herman from Florida Atlantic. Man, has he had about as quick of a fall as he did his rise in the college football ranks. Formerly the head coach at Houston, Texas. I believe before that he was the OC at Ohio State. And since then he has, not done so hot. So Tom Herman let go by FAU. Biff Poggi at Charlotte. Shout out to Biff Poggi and his cutoffs and for getting beat down by the Hoosiers this year. Kind of giving them an early scare, too, in one of the early games this season for about a quarter or half a quarter. But Biff Poggi, he was let go from Charlotte this weekend after, I believe, only 2 seasons. And here's one that'll hit close to home a little bit. Kevin Wilson, unfortunately, let go from Tulsa. I believe I saw earlier his final record was 7-17 with the Golden Hurricane. Unfortunate to see him not be successful, as many might have thought. Of course, before that, he was the OC at Ohio State, co-OC in some situations, before deciding to, if I could say my words correctly, before deciding to go back into the head coaching ranks. And I'm sure he will land on his feet elsewhere, as brilliant of an offensive mind as he is. Mack Brown let go of UNC. I believe this was news that this happened before this past weekend, but of course, UNC a power job. I'll be curious to see what direction the Tar Heels move in. Gus Malzahn, he was not let go at UCF. He, in fact, resigned and has decided to become the offensive coordinator at Florida State. Another move similar to what we saw last year when Chip Kelly no longer wanted to be the head coach at UCLA, and he becomes the OC at Ohio State. And that, for the most part, has turned out pretty well for him. So this will be another interesting experiment, because in this world of NIL, when you're a head coach at a place like UCF, and maybe it's not as wild, of a scenario as if they were still in the G5, but what's the ceiling for someone who's the head coach at UCF? If you want to win national championships, I'm sure you'd much rather be a part of a program that has the immediate resources to do so. And I'm sure that's why Gus Malzahn, or at least part of the reason why he is leaving UCF to be the OC at FSU. So, and FSU, it's kind of a risk for him though, because FSU had one of their worst seasons ever. Were they 1-11 to end the year, if I'm not mistaken? I mean, I'm going to pull up their record right now. I know they had a horrid season, and I want to make sure that I got this correct before I mention it. Why is this showing me the top 25 when I clicked on the ACC? All right. FSU, they finished the regular season. Man, there we go. 2-10, not quite 1-11, not quite as bad as Purdue. But man, to be undefeated last year, 13-0, you lose your quarterback, Jordan Travis, which ends up being the reason you don't go to the college football playoff, the 14 playoff, of course, back then. And then you lose your bowl game, get absolutely destroyed by Georgia, and you come into this season, you play in week 0 over in Dublin, Ireland against Georgia Tech. I don't remember if that game went to overtime or not, but you lost in heartbreaking fashion to the Yellow Jackets, who also just lost in heartbreaking fashion, by the way. And they lost to Georgia in 8 overtimes. But Florida State, man, 2-10. Feel bad for Jalen Lucas, former Indiana punt returner and wide receiver, who transferred there. And I'm sure he's looking over in Bloomington thinking, man, what did I miss out on there? Yeah, there you go. Florida State, Gus Malzahn to FSU. That's how we ended up there. We already talked about Ryan Walters and Purdue. And one more that I'm sure Indiana fans, including myself, obviously, are kind of taking a sigh of relief when they see this. So Neil Brown was let go at West Virginia. A little bit of surprise. He's had some success, moderate success, over the last couple of years, and had a bit of a down year this season. And the reason I say Indiana fans are letting out a sigh of relief in this situation is, I've mentioned this previously, I believe, Curt Cignetti is an alum of West Virginia. And now that Cignetti is really kind of solidified where he's going to be, at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see really this being any threat for Indiana to lose Cignetti. And some of you are probably listening to this thinking, why are we even talking about this? Well, I'm mentioning it because if Indiana had not extended Cignetti, this is a job I would have 100% been worried about when it comes to whether or not Cignetti will stick around to be at Indiana for the foreseeable future, with him being an alum there. And he kind of has that West Virginia personality like that. Just, he doesn't give a crap, that type of stuff. And of course, with him being a former quarterback there, I mean, he has every reason to, have love for his alma mater if he decided to do that. I doubt that will be the case anymore. If this had happened a couple years down the road, which maybe it will, depending on who West Virginia hires, maybe I'd be worried again. But another thing, too, I saw somebody mention this when I was looking through some Twitter posts that were West Virginia fans mentioning, like, why can't we go get Cignetti? And a lot of them were saying, with him already signing that contract, the new contract, plus it seems like he really loves what he's building in Indiana. He's embracing the Bloomington community and all that comes with it. He doesn't really seem like he's in a position where he would want to leave. I mean, maybe if Indiana had a 7-5 year and 8-4 season, maybe it'd be a little bit different. But Curt Cignetti has done literally the impossible in 1 year. I mean, people would have thought, if somebody would have told you that Indiana is going to go 11-1 with the first-year head coach in any season ever, not only would people think you're nuts, but if it ends up being true, you would think you hired Jesus Christ to be your head coach. Now, maybe you'd be 12-0 if it was Jesus, as a matter of fact. But either way, I mean, an 11-1 season prior to now seemed impossible. Indiana had never won more than 9 games. You've now won 2 more than that and a chance to win a 12th and maybe a 13th, depending on what happens. Who knows? But crazy stuff. One more thing I want to talk about before we bring in our man Mitchell Paige. And then on the other side, we'll talk a little Indiana basketball. The flag planting, not even just by Ohio State and Michigan, but all the fights that went on in college football for the rivalry games. What is going on with that? And I know a lot of it, there were copycats. I don't know if they did this because it started with the Michigan and Ohio State game or if this was planned regardless. But there were several away upsets, or maybe they weren't even upsets. They were just away rival victories, like Michigan got with Ohio State, where the winning team would go and plant their flag in the middle of the field, and chaos ensued after that. Of course, most notably with the Michigan and Ohio State game, where there was reports of people pepper spraying or whatever. I don't know if that was security or what it was, but there were multiple punches thrown, players on the ground. It was just not a good look for anybody. And then you find out later that Ohio State and Michigan, the universities, were fined $100,000 apiece, which of course, that is nothing to them. I mean, it's literally just saving face, right? And I saw Kirk Herbstreit mention this over the weekend, and I think as much as this may sound like old man yells at cloud to some people, I think this is absolutely true, and it would hurt the product of college football, but I don't think it should matter. Ultimately, these people are still human beings, and they're not going to play football forever. And so with that being said, I agree with what Kirk Herbstreit said, which was there needs to be, I don't know if it's protocol or what you would refer to it as, but whoever's in charge, I guess really just the head coaches, those who make the highest decisions for both Michigan, Ohio State, and really any of the other teams that were involved in these situations as well, go back on the tape and look who started this nonsense and who created or who let this escalate to a point where it needed or didn't need to be, and figure out how you want to punish them, whether that be sitting out in the bowl game, sitting out in a playoff game. And I know that may sound ridiculous because you want these kids to be able to have their moment, but they also should be able. They also need to be able to learn from their mistakes, right? Like have consequences. I feel like it's becoming very commonplace for people, young or old. Doesn't matter. This is the era that we live in, to where people feel like they can do whatever they want without any consequences, right? And I hope I'm not coming off as preachy. If I am and that bothers some people, I apologize. I'm not trying to sound preachy, but I do think it is a little disturbing, maybe even more than disturbing, what we saw after the game. Again, not even just in Michigan and Ohio State. I believe NC State, North Carolina had a little bit of a debacle. We had, why am I blanking on a couple of the others? I almost mentioned Texas and Texas A&M, but I don't know if they were one of the ones where the flag planting took place. There's a compilation video that I retweeted on my Twitter account at Alden on the Air. That's kind of pretty. The way that they did it, it was funny. They took some highlights from the brawls, or really just from the rivalry moments in general, and put one shining moment, the song, of course, underneath of the highlight reel, which, of course, making a little bit funny, of course. So interesting stuff. I don't know if I fully made my point with that. If I did, and I hope I did. But I do want to move on from it. Just wanted to share my thoughts on all that went down with it. I'm glad we didn't see that with Indiana and Purdue as well, because we could have potentially seen things get chippy with the way that Curt Cignetti was just kind of pounding it down Purdue's throat. And thankfully, we did not get any animosity in the Old Oaken Bucket game. If you're a Purdue player, imagine being. I can't imagine how upset I would be if I was losing 66-0 to anybody, much less your rival. So we'll move on, and let's go ahead and transition into our segment with Mitchell Paige. Always love having him on to talk Indiana football, get his thoughts on all things Hoosiers and beyond, especially looking ahead to the college football playoffs. So without further ado, Mr. Mitchell Paige. Joining me now, as always, Mr. Mitchell Paige. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports, my friend.
What's up? How are you?
I'm great, and especially now that the regular season has come to a close, Indiana tops things off really in the most dominating fashion that you can, with a 66-0 victory over the Purdue Boilermakers, who have now fired Ryan Walters. Again, and we're recording this the day after, so it's technically Sunday, even though this releases on Monday. It is the 1-year anniversary of Curt Cignetti's hiring at Indiana, which it's very fitting to see all of this come full circle a year later.
Yeah, I've been on Twitter a lot today. Um, and I've seen a lot of people retweeting the Ryan Walters tweet. He quote tweeted the Purdue sucks, but so does Michigan and Ohio State. He also, I've seen resurfaced, I guess Purdue doesn't suck. I don't even know when he tweeted that. I think after he got a recruit or something.
I thought it was after Indiana had lost to Purdue in basketball. That's what I thought.
Oh, maybe it was. It was in January. So I couldn't remember when it was. It made no sense on a football timeline, but I guess that's what, like, okay.
Yeah.
This is going to be probably one of the shorter breakdowns that we've had. The reason for what happened yesterday was, we talked about it a little before the show. I don't think Purdue has one Division I player on their roster. That was one of the worst teams. I've no heart, no fight, no energy, just physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically dominated from probably 6 a.m. all the way through midnight. It just was it was a drubbing. Those are two programs that aren't even in the same universe in terms of direction, in terms of where we are today. And I definitely don't envy. It's just funny. You talk about 365, 366 days ago, we were where they are.
Yeah.
So it's not long enough ago that I don't remember what that's like. So, well, yeah, I'm always excited to beat up on little brother because that's what they are in football. They try to act tough even though they're winning the series, blah, blah, blah. They're a little brother to me. We were there not too long ago. So it does, I like being here a lot better. Let's say that.
It is a lot more fun.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, since you were indeed at the game, what was it like being in?
My voice is very hoarse. Can you tell?
Yeah, I could definitely tell. So I guess let me start with there, since you already mentioned that. Like, was this the loudest? Maybe not the loudest you've ever been, because you've been in some more competitive games than this. But I don't know, what was the environment, I guess, like for you? What drove you to be so loud against this particular Purdue team?
Well, it's Purdue, and
yeah.
I mean, you go in knowing that you're going to win by 70. It's a good,
close to it.
It's a good feeling. It's a really, really good feeling. I think the snow added a bunch of excitement and a little different dynamic.
Because it feels like, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen a snow game at Memorial Stadium.
I don't remember playing in one. We played in some on the road, but I can't remember ever having one at home. It's really, I was kind of not upset, but I was hoping for a noon or a 3:30 kick so I could bring my daughter down there. With the cold, it wouldn't have worked out. It was very cold, but
yeah,
you add in the snow under the lights, walking into the stadium when it's dark, and that place it's majestic when the energy's like that. It's not 100,000 seat stadium, this monstrosity that just sticks out and you can see it for miles, but it's a beautiful place to have a football game, and couldn't have asked for a better environment. When they ran on the field, there was just something about it. I don't think it was the loudest. I think that Nebraska was probably the loudest that I have experienced all year. Maybe Michigan's close, but there was something about, I'm gonna use the magic word again. It felt like magic when they ran on the field with the snow, the music.
Well, because everything, again, we talk about going full circle. I mean, this was kind of and not that you're playing in this game that was supposed to be like this uber competitive, finale to a season, but you knew that everything was coming to a head, everything that the season could have been, and you factor in the environment that you're playing in. It felt like you could tell by the way that fans were reacting. I'm sure there on social media, whatever it may be, you could tell the vibes were strong. You knew that the outcome that was likely to happen, which ended up happening, was something that people were thinking about. So I could see why there was an extra piece of magic in the air.
It almost felt like a celebration. A celebration of the best season that any of us that have been alive have experienced. The last 14 weeks have been the best 14 weeks of football since the day I was born. It just is. You can't even quantify it. It just is. It's a different. Everyone you saw was so positive, so celebratory. That's, I think, what added that little different dynamic to the environment last night. And I know it was cold, and a lot of people, not a lot, it was still very full, maybe 98%,
And
99%.
that's the thing too. Like I remember
Yeah.
watching on TV, sitting there, I was like, I wonder what the crowd will look like after halftime, even if they're like, if it's not a close game, will people really just want to see the end of this season because of what it's been? Or will it be more of a kind of a shuffling it out? And it wasn't that. I heard the announcers mention that maybe some of the top of the stands cleared out at halftime, but like 90, 95% of the crowd was still there third quarter onward.
Yeah, it was probably about 90%, and it was cold, man. It was cold. Like, my
I
wife
did see,
had
I don't know if this was true, or maybe I may be saying this incorrectly. It was the coldest kickoff for an Indiana home game. Maybe not ever, but in a certain amount of years. I wish I had that exact phrasing
yeah,
in front of
it
me because I
was
kind of butchered it, but it
it was
definitely looked the part
very
of that.
cold. My wife had her gloves on her hands or on her toes.
I was about to say,
And
where
yeah,
else
had her
would they
gloves
go?
on her gloves on her toes and my gloves on her hands. Um, Now I spent most of the game. I brought sweatshirt and big jacket. I had so much adrenaline. I spent most of it with both of those things on the bleachers.
Probably sweating.
Yeah, I was. It was domination. It's what Indiana's been all year. They had a week where I think they ran into a. I mean, you watch it, Ohio State yesterday. If Indiana gets that Ohio State, who knows what
Tight
happens?
butt cheeks because they're playing their rival. It's literally,
Yeah,
they play differently against Michigan, Ohio State
they
does.
do. And the Ohio State team that we saw, I truly believe was the best team in the country. In rhythm on offense, explosive, creative, putting us in a bind. Even our defense gave up 300 yards, the least they had all year, and it still felt like they were extremely clinical on offense. They were stifling on defense. You just ran into a buzzsaw. That's all that happened. And for you to go back on Sunday after that game as a team, realize that everything you want is still out there. Because my guess is in that locker room, maybe they don't think about it in the moment, but there was probably among the staff some thinking like that may have just cost us the college football playoff. Maybe. Then you go back on Sunday, regroup, and put together a demolition job worse than any team's done to Purdue all year. And now Purdue is, I mentioned, they're terrible. That was the worst Division I team I've ever seen. But Oregon only beat them 35-0. Ohio State, I don't know what their final was, but they didn't beat them 66-0. They played all the big dogs. They played Penn State, didn't get beat 66-0. And Indiana came in there and took care of business from the beginning. I mean, it was comical watching them try to play offense against our. And I honestly don't think I don't care who was out there with the way our defense was playing. They were going nowhere. I don't care what offense is on the other side of the ball. The way that we fly around, there's other defenses out there that are good. I get it, but you're going to have a hard time convincing me that there's defenses in the country that play with more speed and physicality at every level from the defensive line.
Well, there's a reason Brian Haynes he's one of the final nominees for the Broyles Award.
And if he doesn't get it, it's a fake award. That's the way I like the way that.
I mean, Nick, I hate to throw this out there. Nick Sheridan is on the nomination list for that, which is insane.
It's the SEC. The reason Alabama's going to be in the playoff is the same reason that Nick Sheridan, the same Nick Sheridan that we know, and he's very nice, but we watched what he is. We know what he is, right?
Yeah.
They go as their quarterback goes. It's not any scheme. Indiana took a bunch of really talented players, and from the first game of the season, I'm pretty sure if you rewind the tape, we talk about what they did to FIU. It's not like they're just like beating you with goofy stuff. Bryant Haynes puts the right guys in the right positions and then takes the handcuffs off and says, go, fly around. And that's exactly what they do. Jalen Walker is
monster yesterday or on Saturday, I should say.
He's an unbelievable, just I don't have a word for what he impacts the game in so many different ways. They do all kinds of really cool things up front that make it really hard to block them. And then they've got a secondary that makes plays. You're getting one-handed interceptions. You're getting guys just clamped all over the place. And when you can play defense like that, especially with the secondary, it allows you to get really creative and be physical at the point of attack with your front seven. And they're just a complete defense. The offense obviously got it turned back up. I don't know why Purdue played some of the coverages they played. I saw a bunch of cover 0 from like the 19-yard line on third down with DBs that, just had no chance. And we saw it over 66 points worth of it. It just –
real quick, though, what do you think of the length of time that Cignetti kept in the starters? Because I saw that was kind of a point of conversation last night. And I understand why keep them in, because you want to make that statement for the committee. But I also understand taking them out a little bit early because you don't want to risk somebody like a Curtis Rourke getting injured and not being able to play any more games the rest of the season. So what are your thoughts on how that was handled?
I think there's scenarios where I would be much more in favor of putting in the backups. Let's make sure that we're safe. Yesterday was not one of those times. One, you got to win with style. Didn't matter who the other team was. That was going to be the case. But when you have a team like Purdue, you're battling for in-state recruits. You're battling for Midwest recruits, a bunch of guys committed to Purdue. It's an absolute people are getting off the bus quick from Purdue.
Or off the train, if we want to be punny.
Yeah. Way better. What a miss by me that was. They're getting off the train. They're losing recruits left and right. You got to go in and pound them. You have to just send a message to that program that you're underneath our boot for the next 8 years at least.
And that's what Cignetti said, by the way.
We ran a fake punt up 38-0.
And I was going to ask you that too. How do you feel about Cignetti letting that out of the bag, putting that on film a little bit?
Bananas call. Absolutely bananas. I give Ryan Walters actually a lot of credit. In the post-game press conference, they asked him about it, and I think most people be like, yeah, that was not very classy or sportsmanlike. And he said, I would have done the same thing. The rival.
I love that. You know what's great about that? We saw so many instances on Saturday in other rivalry games where, and I know there wasn't like a whole plant. This was Indiana being the home team here. You saw a lot of road teams go and plant their flag on the away team's, midfield marker. You saw fights starting after that.
Yes, NC State, North Carolina ended in a fight. Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan. Purdue, now it's when you get beat 66-0, there's I think your fight's kind of gone anyways. But
one thing you could have seen too, I saw somebody mention that actually it was Abby, Dustin's friend, girlfriend. I don't even know why I'm beating around the bush with that.
Yeah, it's his girlfriend.
I guess in my mind I was like, is this something I shouldn't be revealing? But yeah, it's not like it's private information.
It's been a thing for a while.
Yeah. She had mentioned that Indiana's lucky that Purdue's players aren't dirty, like just trying to take out people's legs and stuff like that and trying to injure them. Like that could have been an issue potentially on Saturday.
Would it have been? It never felt like they were even close to us. And I think that's why it was safer. And yeah, you can have the freak play, but how many times did Curtis Rourke feel any pressure outside of the 2 sacks that happened in the first drive? Never. His jersey, the snow helped, but it was about as clean as it's been all season. He just stood back there and delivered. He never was in trouble. The receivers never were really in trouble. We're running wide open. We're getting 8 yards a carry. I had no problem with them staying on. I think even if Purdue was dirty, it wouldn't have mattered. They would have been punching air. They were seeing ghosts all day. And sometimes that happens. It got away from you and got away quick. I don't think they had really any chance. It didn't matter how they wanted to play. They were dominated in every aspect.
What do you think about the, projection for the college football playoff? I think it's pretty much a guarantee that they will be in at this point. It's just a matter of who they will be traveling against. There may be an off chance that they host. I wouldn't bet on that at the moment. I don't even really know what scenario would play out that would give Indiana the chance to host. But I guess I'll give you 2 questions. Who would you like to see Indiana go on the road and face? And who do you think they'll end up going? Because again, there's still conference championship week to happen that will shake some things up for the final rankings. But what do you think and hope will happen for Indiana?
Yeah, I think they end up. I unfortunately don't think they will host a playoff game.
I agree.
I think they're good enough to. But dropping them 5 spots, the same amount of spots basically that Alabama dropped and Ole Miss dropped after losing to unranked opponents, you drop them the same amount that Indiana went to what looked like the best team in the country and got beat.
And I'll say it doesn't help them doesn't help their argument, I guess, with the fact that Ohio State lost to Michigan. But Indiana beat that Michigan team that beat them, so it's a triangle.
Like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So they beat them a couple weeks ago. They just did. So I don't think that hurts.
Yeah, that doesn't really hurt or help.
Right. Okay.
Is
Well, Ohio State lost. Yeah, to a team that Indiana had already beat. So what are we even talking about?
Also both played on each other's home fields as well. So there's no argument with that.
They went into your building and beat the crap out of you. That's what happened. You're high flying, super tough, super physical. You got smoked by a horrible team. Now they played a lot better towards the end of the year. They did.
And they also have good players that, in my opinion, are just not coached very well most of the time.
And obviously it's a lot easier for Michigan to get up for the Ohio State game, right? They're all, whether they're 12-0 or 11-0 or 0-11 going into that game, you're going to get their best shot. And I think my gripe is less, and this is going to be a long-winded answer to your question, but with totally the way that the rankings play out, because I tweeted something today, like it's really annoying that Ohio State loses at home to an unranked Michigan team and doesn't drop farther.
But we don't know where they're going to drop yet because they won't come out till Tuesday.
I mean, just using the AP poll. And the AP poll doesn't matter, but so far this year it's gone pretty close.
Yeah, it's been pretty parallel for the most part.
Right. So my gripe is less with Ohio State specifically. I don't have a problem. Ohio State did just beat us pretty handily. So not jumping in front of them, I understand. My gripe is more if everything happened in a vacuum and you couldn't see which team was which. And you're looking at, okay, this team lost to this team in this way, and this team lost to this team in this way. Things would be handled a lot differently. And mostly I'm talking about the Alabamas, the Ole Misses. When you lose to an Oklahoma team that got beat by a zillion by Texas and has gotten beat by everyone, and you score 3 points against that team, how is it justifiable that you drop about the same amount that a team that went to the number 2 team in the country that a lot of people have number 1 in the country? How is that equal? So yeah, they're not going to host a playoff game, but that got decided last week when they dropped them as far as they did, pretty undeservingly. And I just
there could have been a couple of things that played out this weekend that, of course, did not happen. If Georgia had lost in that 8 overtime game to Georgia Tech, had Notre Dame lost on the road to USC, then we might be talking about a different conversation at this point.
Yeah. And Notre Dame didn't. I mean, they won by 2 touchdowns eventually. They scored a bunch of points, but they gave up 35 to a 500 team. And
by the way, I'll go and intervene here. I want to see Indiana travel up to South Bend. That's what I want to have happen.
Yeah.
And I know that we talked about this before. I see why people would think that that's a scary matchup, but maybe I just want it because of what it is. Indiana versus Notre Dame in-state.
Yeah.
And I do think Cignetti would have them ready. And here's the thing. That's more than likely a game that would be played in similar weather conditions that they just played in this past weekend. And I know Notre Dame's used to that nonsense as well. But now that we've finally seen a game, because we've had a few games where the temperatures had been getting lower over the last few weeks. You've seen some issues with receivers dropping catches because maybe they weren't used to it at the time. Well, this past Saturday was about as bad as it could get for this portion of the country, in my opinion, for this time of year, of course.
Yep.
And so I don't see any reason that Indiana would be fazed by the weather conditions per se. And it could make for an interesting, game against a team that, of course, will have pressure to perform. And if you get them on the ropes early, I'd like Indiana's chances in that scenario if that's the way it played out. But
yeah,
I'm getting a little long-winded with it.
No, I think there's a couple teams that I think would be really fun to go play. I would love to play a team from the SEC. I don't even care who it is.
Because I actually agree with you there too.
Just because we find out, right? Like we've had this SEC bias conversation. You find out pretty quick if they were right. or if we were right. So I think that would be a fun game, a crazy environment. I can't even imagine, because the
And there's so
SEC.
many stadiums they could travel to. Knoxville, insane stadium. They could travel to Georgia, insane stadium.
Yep.
That's probably the only teams that they would go on the road against from the SEC,
Yeah.
considering Texas, or I guess potentially Georgia, if they win, could get the bye. I mean, if Texas loses, that's a team you could go down and play. I mean, all three of those stadiums are.
I think Texas is locked up probably the 5 seed if they lose. That's the lowest that.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well,
here's the thing. What if Oregon and Texas lose?
That's true.
Then you have one of those getting the 5, one of them getting the 6. Probably Oregon getting the 5 at that point.
Correct. I guess I might have spilled the beans on what I think about Penn State as a team. But I think there's a couple teams that would be really fun. One thing that's kind of interesting. So after the game yesterday, I just was hanging down around. There's a couple players on the team that I know, so I just wanted to say what's up to them, tell them, congrats on what an awesome year, and there's still a bunch to come, right? And I had to ask the question, who do you guys want to see? And this might be some bulletin board material. Hopefully Ohio State doesn't need it, but without a second hesitation, they said, we want to play Ohio State again. They didn't see half of what we got. And
that's very intriguing to hear.
I asked this to probably 10 players independently, and without hesitation, it was Ohio State. We want to go there and we want to play them, because they haven't seen. And it was like, there has to be some kind of message that was coming from the locker room, because they all said some variation of they haven't seen.
You know what? Part of it probably is they saw what Michigan did to him, and they probably a light bulb went off and said, we're better than what happened last week.
My guess is they knew that stint in the locker room in Columbus, right?
Maybe.
You just protected so poorly. You had some drops. You had some just silly, uncharacteristic miscues on special teams. And that's where the game got away from you. You allowed them to pin their ears back and make it way harder to block them. So, second chance, who knows, right? If you clean up those couple mistakes on special teams, could be a completely different game. But that's who the players want to play. If it's me, I want to go play Penn State, because I think they're very beatable. I think that
I don't think there's a team, and we'll wrap this up. I think I am convinced at this point there is not a single team that is that much better than everybody else in this year's college football.
Totally agree. It's going to be awesome. It's a perfect year for Indiana to be what they are. A team that smokes everybody, has been a lightning rod of conversation. Now you get a chance to prove it. And fortunately, I was a little bit worried watching the Clemson, South Carolina game, some other games around the country, that if Indiana didn't go out and handle business like professionals, that they might get jumped and we might miss it.
Well, it's unfortunate your Miami Hurricanes helped them out a little bit too by losing to Syracuse.
Yeah, I mean, I can be honest with you. Miami all year has been extremely flawed. I'm biased because I love them. It's a bad team. They're horrible on defense. Indiana would have beat them by 3 touchdowns just because they couldn't stop anyone, and it was bound to happen, and the wheels came off at the wrong time. They're out of the playoff, I think, 100% now.
Unless they win. Are they? No, they're not even in the ACC championship because Clemson won.
Clemson plays SMU for the ACC. So Miami's out. I think the ACC has become a 1-bid league because Clemson. I
don't know. I could see Clemson. If Clemson beats SMU, it wouldn't surprise me if they both get in. But who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that SMU is really good, but I just don't think that's a team that Indiana would see. And I don't think that's a team that would jump Indiana for a spot just because their name is kind of the same as ours, right? It doesn't carry the weight that Alabama or Georgia.
Well, SMU currently in the AP poll, only 1 spot ahead of them. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect it to be an issue.
Right. And that's more that's more the angle I'm coming from is I was worried about the teams hanging around at 12, 13, and 14, and the things that we needed to happen kind of happened. And most importantly, Indiana took care of business like they're supposed to. And the justification of bumping them out after a performance like that against a rival when everyone else in the country struggled, everybody struggled. there wasn't a game that was as dominant as the Indiana game. It'd just be really hard to justify bumping them now. So I'm excited. I think the rankings Tuesday will give us a really good idea. I don't think a ton is changing the next, because there's still 2 rankings to come out, right?
Yeah, so the final ranking will come out, I believe it's
Sunday.
the Sunday after all of the
Next
conference
week.
championships.
Yeah,
so yeah, the next
Sunday.
time you and I talk, we'll know Indiana's final fate for the college football playoff.
Yeah, and then we got a couple weeks to gear up.
Yeah, gear up for it. I'm excited.
It's going to be awesome.
What happens. Mitchell, I appreciate your time as always. Took you longer than I anticipated, but hey, that's what happens whenever things are going well with Indiana football, right?
And boy, have they been.
They have been.
More to
Mitchell,
come,
appreciate
John.
you. There is more to come. The season's not over. I was going to say for the first time ever, but like in this scenario, for the first time ever, the season's not over. I'm excited.
Me too. All
right. We'll do this next week.
Yes, sir.
Big thanks to Mitchell Paige as always. Appreciate him stopping by last night, I should say, since I could clearly recorded that yesterday. You look how dark it was in the room he was recording in. But good to hear that he had a great time at the Snow Globe game. I love the snow game stuff. I know I talked a little bit about that last week. Never been to a snow football game. Been to some colder weather football games. But if you were in attendance at Memorial Stadium this past weekend for Indiana versus Purdue, I think I 100% agree with Mitchell that it just felt like a celebration. It felt like just a magical moment. You know, as corny as that sounds, Indiana football doesn't get to enjoy a lot of good corny, I should say, right? We had LEO, and that was kind of bad corny towards the end. It was good corny for a while. But moving on from that, excuse me for picking at my teeth. I felt something moving around. Sorry if that's disgusting. But anyway, let's move on and talk a little bit about, is it the elephant in the room? Is it really that right now? It kind of feels like it a little bit, especially because the roles are usually reversed with these two programs, and that is Indiana basketball. Now, I don't want to act like the sky is falling right now, but there were moments this past weekend or Thanksgiving week where it kind of felt like the sky was about ready to fall or was actively falling. I think that Louisville game is a prime example of just letting something get completely away from you and not really having a response for it. Really felt like a carbon copy. I mean, not exactly. Maybe it was worse. It felt in some way, shape, or form like the Auburn game from last year. And that got things off to a horrendous start in the battle for Atlantis. Follow that up with another blowout loss to Gonzaga. And then you rebound finally in game 3 at 11 a.m. on the final day of the tournament, where you faced a Providence team who hadn't played in 12 hours. So that's where they are right now, right? We did a deep dive on that on Friday, so I'm not going to do that quite the same way again, but that's where we are. Hoosiers are 5-2. Heading into their next slate of games, they have 2 non-conference opponents this week before they have 2 conference games next week. So before they enter conference play briefly, they'll face Sam Houston tomorrow night on the Big Ten Network at 7:30. And then this Friday, they'll face Miami of Ohio also on the Big Ten Network at 7 p.m. So a couple of get-right games. I don't know if that's become a cliche term yet. I do feel like, I don't know if I use it a lot, but I do hear people use that phrasing a lot after your team comes off of a few bad performances or a bad performance, whatever it may be. But this is a couple of good games for Indiana to try to re-find its footing. And I know it's hard to really think, like, what are we really going to learn about this team in the next couple of days or during this week, right? Obviously, you want them to respond by doing what they've done against their other lesser opponents so far this year, which is, for the most part, beat them to smithereens. In some cases, it's taken them a little bit longer to do that than others. I mean, the Eastern Illinois game is a prime example of tale of two halves, where you were down and then you completely destroyed them after that. You did what you were supposed to do. I haven't quite looked at how good for their level Sam Houston or Miami of Ohio are. All I know is it doesn't really matter, right? because Mike Woodson, even though he's never lost one of these games before, you can't afford now to have a slip up against a team like Sam Houston or Miami of Ohio. You are supposed to be superior to these teams. And so get right. That's, again, to just be cliche about it, I guess, since I've brought that out into the open, do what you're supposed to do. Win this game comfortably, keep everybody healthy. Hopefully, well, I'd like to see more good stuff from Langdon Hatton. It was nice to see him have a couple of good games off the bench in the battle for Atlantis. And he doesn't ever have to be, your biggest scorer or anything like that. But just to have somebody who can come off the bench and provide that spark when you need it, kind of be that, not that he's a sixth man, but like he's going to bring the energy when he comes in. He wants to be on the floor whenever he's given the opportunity. And every good basketball team needs to have a guy like that. And I think that's going to be Mr. Hatton for the Hoosiers this year. I was going to say hometown guy, home state guy is a better way to say it, from Georgetown. Not quite from Bloomington, of course. But hopefully we see more of that. Want to see the guards get comfortable again. It seems like it felt like Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle were lost in Atlantis. I don't know if they were lost in paradise or what it may be. Trey Galloway, same thing, especially against Louisville. I'd like to see a resurgence from them and then have that carry over into your conference games a week later. You'll start that slate off on Monday, December 9th, when you face Minnesota. And I will take a look. I've got their schedule pulled up right now. What they've done so far, they've defeated in their first two games, they beat Oral Roberts and Omaha. Not much to say there. They took a loss to North Texas by 3 points at home after that. Since then, they beat Yale, Cleveland State, Central Michigan, had 2 straight losses against Wichita State and Wake Forest. One of those by 2 points, Wichita State, and then lost by 6 to Wake Forest. And they just recently defeated Bethune. I guess it's formerly Bethune-Cookman, but what happened to Cookman? Who knows? They beat them 79-62. And they'll actually already have a conference game under their belt before they face Indiana. They'll face Michigan State in a couple of days, actually, at home. And then they'll come and travel, face the Hoosiers in their second conference game whenever Indiana's playing them for their first one. So not much to really show that Minnesota's a good team here. I mean, when you have 3 losses, especially when one of them is to a North Texas team, someone from the G5 level at home. Is it the G5 in basketball? I know that there's way more subpar or, middle tier conferences in college basketball as opposed to football. But I guess North Texas, they technically are in the G5, right? Because CUSA, if that's the conference they're even still in, I know they've been in that conference or were in that conference recently. I don't know if they moved to the Sun Belt or not. They did a lot of shuffling around the last several years at that level. And again, when you have those losses and no real good win to speak of, kind of similar to Indiana, I would say Indiana, of course, on paper, they should beat this Minnesota team in a week, but they have to play their other 2 games first. But just wanted to kind of take a look at that opponent. And then also, this isn't a team that they've had your number for the last, definitely last year. I don't know what the series has been like. I don't know the exact record of the last 3 or 4 years, but I get the sense that when Indiana plays in Nebraska, I know I said this with Mitchell when we were talking about Ohio State and Michigan. For some reason, when Indiana plays in Nebraska, their butt cheeks clench up, right? They play scared, and it's honestly kind of embarrassing, right? When you think about Indiana and Nebraska, football school versus basketball school, historically, you want to be able to take care of the Nebraskas like that. The same way that they want to be able to take care of the Indiana footballs of the world. We had that, the Indiana-Nebraska blowout, 56-7. It feels like Nebraska basketball, Nebraska ball, if you will, has been handing the Hoosiers L's for a while. At least last year, I know they did. Freaking Keisei Tominaga. I mean, he was a sniper from downtown. He was hungry when he came to play Indiana, and not just Indiana. He was good against a lot of opponents, but Hoosiers were actively afraid of him. At least it seemed like they were. And then you end your season, I believe, against that same Nebraska team in the Big Ten tournament. And Mike Woodson, that's when he gets his infamous technical, and then it's really one of the most embarrassing exits from a college basketball season that you could have had, especially after all of the noise that had been going around up to, before that, after the Liam McNeely stuff, and then all of the just not saying the right things. And again, now I'm getting angry, right? So I'm getting a little feral when it comes to maybe not. Those are Indiana's two opponents, right? So Indiana will go on the road to face Nebraska. Hold on, am I looking at this correct? So yeah, Nebraska will also face Michigan State before they face Indiana, just like Minnesota. They'll go on the road to Michigan State and host Indiana on December 13th. So interesting couple of matchups for Indiana. I feel like also Indiana, I feel like they face Nebraska a lot in these two opening Big Ten games that they've done for the last few years now. I know it's not every season that they've done that. Maybe they faced Minnesota last year. I know one of them was Michigan. Maybe the other one was Minnesota last year. So who knows? Golden Gophers, Cornhuskers, they await the Hoosiers. But before then, they'll take on the Bearcats of Sam Houston, and the Red Hawks of Miami of Ohio. That's what awaits Indiana this week. And hopefully, as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, we see we don't want to see them slogging around, being sluggish, right? We want this team to be hungry, because if they don't look the part this week, I mean, fans will continue to have a reason to wonder what's going to happen for the rest of the season. Is it going to be another dud when you've invested? And I know not every fan, and in fact, most fans don't contribute a lot of NIL money, nor should they have to. But to know that a lot of NIL money was invested into this team after what we've seen just last year, I mean, it's going to really, the noise will get very loud very quickly if Indiana does not live up to its potential. And they don't have to be the best team in the country, but they just have to look the part. And they did not look the part last week. Again, I feel like I'm starting to spin in circles with it, but that's exactly what we are dealing with when it comes to the current state of this Indiana basketball team. One or two more things I want to get into before we wrap this thing up. This was very, I almost said disturbing, but that's not really the best way to phrase this. It's very unexpected, I'll say, from UConn head coach Dan Hurley. And he's had a couple of outbursts like we saw back in the Maui Invitational. I guess it was last week. He's not really been acting like somebody who's very, almost said presidential, more like championship caliber. But maybe he is at the same time. Guys like Mike Krzyzewski, I feel like especially in their later years, became known for being a bit of whiners, even though they were still very good head coaches. They whined a lot. Well, Dan Hurley, over the last 7 days, has kind of been falling into that category himself. And after going 0-3 in the Maui Invitational, I mean, it's not a worse finish than Indiana in the battle for Atlantis. They lost all 3 games. No, I don't think they got blown out. Maybe they got blown out against Dayton. I don't have that score right in front of me, but I do have reason to believe that I think that was the case in their final game. That's the thing about these MTEs. And maybe I'm kind of backing up Dan Hurley here, because he's going to make a comment that I'm going to play here in a second that turns some people off. And I do think it's a bit of whining. But there is something about these MTEs when you play back-to-back-to-back days that, like, when you're not playing well, you stack up losses pretty quickly, and that's unfortunate for how that stuff plays out. But what happened is Dan Hurley basically said he's not going to be playing in these MTEs anymore. And I'll go ahead and roll right now the quote that he said in front of the UConn media.
Maybe that I'm not doing another 3-game MTE again. And that moving forward, we will only play home and homes and single game events in big time arenas. I don't think I'll ever do a 3-game MTE again, unless I'm not coaching here at some point somewhere else. There's zero chance I'll do that again.
I mean, I think it's just the way that he says it too. He is whining. You are a back-to-back national champion, and you can't handle losing a few games in Maui, and so you're like, oh, we're not going to play an MTEs anymore. You know who you sound like? Dan Hurley. And I know he's not listening to this. I have a lot of respect for Dan Hurley. I'm glad he came back to UConn. I'm glad we have another head coach that is kind of filling the void of legendary head coaches in college basketball. But that is the most, pardon my language, that is the bitchiest comment you could have made coming off of back-to-back national championships. And this is how you're going to handle going 0-3 in the Maui Invitational? Give me a freaking break. Because here's the thing. If Dan Hurley was Indiana's coach saying this, I don't think Indiana fans would be on board with this. And maybe UConn fans are would be the exact same way. Maybe they're not enjoying this version of Dan Hurley. But you can't, I feel like you can't be like that. And I know I'm not a head coach. I never will be a head coach. But I do know that this guy knows how to win championships. And maybe that's why he's acting the way that he's doing. He can say whatever he wants. He's this is a very John Calipari thing to say, what he did. And very Mike Krzyzewski kind of way to act, being a little whiny head coach right there. And it just surprises me to see him kind of go down this route, right? And I'm sure his team will be fine. I'd be very surprised at this team if Dan Hurley and UConn just completely fell off a cliff after winning back-to-back titles, something that hadn't been done since Florida in the late decade of the 2000s. Very surprising, but also just not a good look. I know I said I was about to back him up. Here's the thing. I understand. That's the point I was just making about the MTEs kind of sucking the mental life out of you. I get it. And if you don't want to play in it, that's fine. I just think getting behind a microphone and saying that and looking like a little B word, like I said, it's just not a good look. So anyway, I guess, shout out to him just being transparent. I'll just give him a compliment for that, I guess. So I guess that's how we're going to wrap up today's show with a little Dan Hurley nonsense. So until Wednesday, we'll have more. I'll get to your YouTube comments on Wednesday. I feel like I haven't done that in a while, and there's been quite a bit piling up that I want to get to. And I'll do that on Wednesday. We'll do non-revs on Wednesday as well. We'll react to what happened on Tuesday night when Indiana faces Sam Houston. Hopefully it's good stuff. And we'll also react to the next edition of the college football playoff rankings. So until then, be sure to check out everything going on at HoosierIllustrated.com as always. Subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube. Hit that notifications bell if you want to be notified of anything that gets uploaded to the YouTube page. And yeah, appreciate you doing that if you choose to do so. And until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.